Joan Bauer. And Joan, it's so great to see you. You look happy and wonderful.
Well, thank you, Steve. I'm delighted to be here with you. When was the last time we saw each other? I don't even remember.
It's been a long time, and
That's right.
I've used I was not somebody who stalked a lot of authors when I was at Allen or NCTE, but for some reason we were at NCTE at the same time. I think it was about when Peeled came out.
Okay.
So how
Okay.
long that is a
Yeah,
while.
it was a while ago.
And you were in the back listening, I think, to a couple of other people before you had to go on. And I struck up a conversation with you and we took a picture and and I don't do that as often as I should because I hadn't started the blog. So, this is, and I thought, if I'd have taken a picture with every author I had a conversation with, I might have a lot to put on my blog.
That's great.
So since I have few, yours recycles in the gallery from time to time, and I think, oh yeah. And as I was doing these conversations, I remembered I really had a really lovely couple of minutes with Joan. It would be great to see if she's doing interviews because I haven't seen you at NCT or Allen for quite a few years. I
Yeah,
don't
it's been quite a few years. Yes,
you
that's
go
right.
or not, but it's interesting. So I thought I know so little about her beginnings that I kind of knew the middle books maybe better than some of the others.
Oh, okay.
Like I knew Tree, I knew Pilled, and then I
Yeah.
revisited just recently through audiobook Hope was here. Oh,
Yeah.
and what a and like I just revisited, and then it's about a local election and
I
being
know. I
kind
know.
and truthful. So I was reading Hope was there a few weeks ago, and I thought, oh wow, to have this reading there. So one of the things I'd like for you to tell us about, and I know that you cover this a little bit on your blog, but a lot of readers don't go there. How did you come up with your first novel? Who were you before you were
Yes.
the Joan Bauer young adult advocates know? And, how did that first novel come about? So tell us a little about who you were before and who
Yeah.
you are now.
Well, that's a bit of a journey. It's a great question. Prior to becoming a writer, and I'd always wanted to do it, I had been in advertising sales for uh, for many years, and before that, I had been a waitress, and I had been all of these, kind of unusual things. All of which the great, as you know, writers use it all.
Yeah.
Nothing is lost on a writer. So anyways, I'd been a waitress and I had all these things, but I'd always had the heart to be, to be a writer. And I had worked briefly at, when I was pregnant, at American Baby magazine.
Oh,
And so I was writing about all the mistakes that I made and all of these things. So I was really getting into just the sense of all of that. I was kind of a crazy salad, as Nora Ephron, would call it. It just got to the point, the interesting thing, do you find this, and maybe some of the people online will find it too. You get this idea, you have to do it. You press in and it begins as a whisper and then it ends up as a shout, kind of kicking you in the butt. And that's what ended up happening for me. I couldn't not try. I I trained as a screenwriter, and I had had a couple of years of doing that, and I was signed by a big talent agency in New York City. And 3 days after I was signed, I was in a car accident and I had to have neurosurgery, and I had to stop what I was doing for quite some time. And I tell you, I learned about dreams. And I remember lying in bed. Our daughter was 6 years old at the time. And I remember lying in bed at home. Like, man, I just felt lousy. And I was in so much pain. And she would come in and sort of see me. And I felt like a window had opened. And my dream just ran out that window. And then through a series of events, as I was trying to recover, I started hearing the voice of this character, which from my first novel, Ellie Morgan. And I thought, well, that's crazy. That's nice. I can't even sit at my desk. What am I going to do with this? But she kept pressing in. She was strong. She was funny. I had never had that happen before. I never had a character be so alive and, kind of irritable toward me. Like, really, I'm here now. You got to do something about it. And I sat at my desk I could only sit at my desk for 15 minutes. And I wrote a little bit. And I went back and I lay down. I felt sorry for myself, and then I got up a little later, I did a little bit more. The 15 minutes grew to an hour, and that grew to a couple hours. And at the end of the year, who had never, ever, ever said I was going to write a novel, no, thank you very much. I had written my first, I'd written my first novel, and then somebody told me I'd written a young adult novel, and I went, well, I don't know, really? Okay. And I had to, I found an agent, I found all these things, but it was all of this craziness. And it was through extraordinary adversity that I came to this place. And as we look around at what's happening in our country right now, right? And just the adversity and the challenges, there is something about the beauty about being a writer that we grow in that petri dish of adversity, all kinds of stories. I believe this, that maybe we wouldn't have told in peaceful times or in easy times in our life. When the fire really starts burning, there's something about a storyteller who rises to the occasion. So anyway, that's what happened to me.
Well,
Was
to document this, we're recording this on November 6th, 2024, after
Yes.
the result of the election. And I had another author friend who said, now is the time that artists produce.
Yes, that's
If
right.
there was ever a time for artists to produce, we can lament or be sad or whatever, but artists need to produce, because it's even Solzhenitsyn said, he didn't write for himself. He said he wrote for the nameless thousands who couldn't climb a pulpit. So his Nobel speech, which he couldn't give because he couldn't get out of Russia at the time,
Yeah.
was smuggled out. So he's writing from a place where there's the need to write because your voice maybe represents, or your art, or whatever it is, films, visual representations, music, are going to represent the voices of people who maybe can't or who are stifled. And it's interesting that yours comes out of so much personal trauma that you were. Now, are you okay now? This has been quite a
I
few years.
am.
Yeah.
Yeah, I am. I definitely am. And I actually had to, go through some real
Yeah.
real recovery, because I was not focusing very well. I was
Oh,
not walking. I went through a whole thing. But yeah, no, I'm fine. I can usually tell it's right in my neck. That's where
yeah.
the surgery was. I can usually tell when a storm is coming before other
Oh,
people know, but other than that, yes, I am fine, and I'm sore. But listen, I learned about humor in dark times
yeah.
because this girl was funny. Man,
Yeah.
did I need to laugh. And have you ever been in that situation where you're laughing and yet you're hurting? And the same thing, that's what was happening to me at the same time. And my mother was a high school English teacher. And so I was seeped in metaphor, whether I liked it or not,
Yeah. Whether you like it or
and
not.
it's just how it was at our house. And so I'm writing this story called Squashed about a girl who wants to grow the biggest pumpkin in Iowa. I'm sure part of it had to do with the drugs that I was taking, the painkillers, because I'd never grown a vegetable that lived.
Yeah.
And I didn't even know I could do this. But I researched it, I did all this stuff. But I knew that underneath the soil of the story, it was about having a big dream
Yeah.
and wanting to bring it back up. Because I was sure I was done as a writer. And now all
Yeah.
of a sudden, here this thing comes. So our stories, the tributaries in our hearts and in our lives go through the rivers of our story all the time. But I learned that humor isn't just humor. Man, that was, a survival mechanism for me. I
Well,
pushed that button and I felt better.
well, that's one of the things I remember about you. And I'm trying to remember if I'd heard you speak once before I did that, but you are always one of the authors that I think, okay, if you're going to bring somebody to an event and you want people to laugh, bring Joan
Oh,
because
thank you.
you know I thought you were pleasant before you went up. Your speech was funny and engaging. You do it in a way in which you're talking about the humor of the event or the character, but you also have the unique ability to be self-deprecating in a way that just kind of lets people know that you're open to having discussions about what's funny in the world. And your books always have that sense of comedy that's kind of underlying something that's certainly um, more devastating, right?
Yeah.
I think if we can go back and I'll pick on one
Okay.
that I like quite a bit. Um, when we pick on Tree's
Yeah,
story,
that would be stand tall. Yeah,
yeah, Stand Tall. It's like there's a lot of difficulty going on in that book,
that's right. That's
but
right.
but Tree's funny, his grandfather's funny, people are holding this together, but there's difficulty going on in the book, and I think that's it's not unique in young adult literature, but for people to do something beyond just a comic novel, because
Yeah,
you're not doing just a comic novel.
that's right.
You're doing something often very quite serious that has an underlayment of a character who can see, oh, okay.
Yeah,
Let's talk about the reality of this as we're
right.
dealing with it. So how let's talk about Stand Tall. Because
Okay.
you don't write a lot of male characters,
I
right? That
don't.
are your protagonists. So how does that come about?
Yeah, well, it's interesting that Stand Tall, once again, was written in the fires of affliction because I had started Stand Tall before 9/11.
Oh,
And I had the grandfather in the war and, some of the
yeah,
war analogies and all that stuff. But then 9/11 hit. My family and I moved to Brooklyn. It's a big story. My
yeah,
studio was looked over, the Manhattan skyline with a hole in the sky. And my husband had been saved from, he was supposed to be at Windows on the World for breakfast, and he wasn't there because we were moving. I mean, it was just unbelievable. And I could not write. I couldn't do it. I went up there and I would look out the window, I'd start to cry. And I had a deadline and I had already spent, some of the money that they had given me, the advance. And I thought, well, what am I going to do? And and yet all of a sudden I realized, Joan, this is a book about war, the war of divorce, the war of finding out who you are, but also, these lessons learned from Vietnam. That was a very, very difficult war.
yeah, yeah,
Joan, and now you are seeing it it transformed me. It helped me zero in. It's interesting. It didn't make it broader. It made it more narrow. And I thought, okay, how do we crop the photograph? What do we want them to see? You can't show everything.
yeah,
So I was able to crop it more deeply. Now, I was always the second tallest person in my class. And I always felt, I just was just hard for me. And my mother said, we're sending you to charm school. Really, there was a charm school so that you can learn to stand up tall. So I had this sense about, kind of being a little off in terms of my height, being different.
yeah,
My folks divorced. It broke me up. It was very, very hard. I was always looking for a purpose. So I understood Tree that way. I didn't understand what it was like to be a boy, but that's okay. I understood enough about the other things. So I don't know, it's just one of those ideas that just kind of came together. And I love this kid. Oh my gosh, I
yeah,
love this kid.
yeah,
And just his struggle. And this craziness about, when you're tall, everybody expects all this stuff from you. They expect you to be older. They expect you to be good at basketball. They expect you to all these things. So, it all came together. And Sophie Santak in the book, played the flute and I played the flute.
Yeah.
And, you know, there were just all these little Joan pieces of my heart in it. And yeah, and but I had to give Tria's big moment at the end. I just had to do it.
It's
I
another
couldn't let it
book
go.
that I wish kind of, um, I want to say your books, you know, you have a career, you're identified as a writer in the young
Yeah,
adult world, certainly, but I think there's a few of your books that need more audience, you know, and I guess that's one of the
you.
reasons I try to do these interviews, is I hope maybe we'll find a few more readers. But
Yeah.
I really thought if there's a group of characters that you want to have some empathy for, you know, this is really a good book. And for people
Thank
in
you.
our generation, you know, that experienced the Vietnam War at least tangentially. Some of us, you know, I was in that year where people before me were drafted, but our year was the last year that wasn't drafted. So I
Sure.
had friends whose brothers went and all those kinds of things. So it's very, very close. But um, we need to remember those times better, and we need to tell those stories in ways that our students and children and other
Yeah.
people can grab a hold of those memories, right?
Hmm.
So I like that this is a book that springs its impulse out of 9/11. I like that a lot.
Ah, thank you. I appreciate what you said. A lot of people have told me that Stand Tall is one of their favorites, and it's the only book that I did that was third person.
Oh, yeah. Let's see.
And
So I'm cataloging the ones I know, and I think, oh, well,
yeah,
there you go.
yeah. The only time I did that, but I just felt, and there really isn't a bad guy.
Right,
Stand
right.
Tall. You know, it's just a bunch of broken people, you know, trying to figure stuff out. And that
Well,
really,
yeah, I like the when the house, you know, they have to move out
yeah,
of the house because, and then they move back in with the mom, you know, here's the, you know,
yeah,
the awkwardness of all of that going on. I think, well, here's people who maybe are separated, but at their core, they're still trying to care for each other, right? There's
yes,
a
yeah,
sense of how do we care for each other, even though we're separated in some way. And that's a wonderful sentiment, I think. Another book that I like a lot with that's really character driven by the main character is Hope Was Here.
yeah.
Hope is a great character. And when I found out that she named herself, I love that.
Thank you.
Almost more than anything I could tell you, you know. So how did that character come to you? Are you going to tell me there's another crisis in your life that now you're
Oh, I'm sure there was, but I forgot it. I think that, you know, it was, well, I tell you, one of the things when I wrote the story, um, and we had to delay it because, Chris Lynch had written a book, I think called Political Timber. And there hadn't been any YA books on politics, maybe ever. And then all of a sudden, Chris's was coming out and mine was supposed to come out the fall. And I'll never forget when my editor called me, she said, "Joan, how are you?" And I thought, "Oh, you tell me, how am I?" She said, "We have this issue." And I hadn't, you know, and we just decided to delay it. And then I wrote Rules of the Road
Oh,
in between. It was just all these interesting things, but there wasn't a crisis as much as I was watching. I'm a real politico. I'm very interested in the political process. I'm maddened by it. I'm all kinds of things, but I really am. And I was as a kid. And it was bothering me. There was just stuff in the news at the time saying that kids could care less about politics. And there was this just sort of this generation growing up who didn't have the sense about what does it mean to be a citizen. So I thought, well, I never start with theme, never. But in that
uh-huh.
case, I kind of did. And
Yeah.
I had to, you know, not make it so heavy. The first couple of drafts, my editor said, "Joan, it sounds like you're writing this as a 40-year-old, you know, political person who's crabby." And I went, "Oh no, I gotta make her sound like a teenager so I can bring myself out of that, you know?" I really did. It was so weird. But I did, and I found her, I'm so glad that this is a book. Hope Was Here is a book that's almost like, you know, serving a feast to people, and only having stuff that you love.
Yeah.
So it was just, I just put all this stuff in there. And I remember I was living in Connecticut at the time, and I remember I was researching it. And you know, when you actually go to the library and get books out. And I knew the librarian really well. And so I had this book about, not knowing who your father is, malfeasance in government, cancer. There were a few others. And so I bring it to the checkout desk. She looked at me, she put her hand over my hand and she said, "Boy, you've had a bad week." He said, "No, no, 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 no. I'm writing a book and it's about hope."
And it's about hope.
It's
Well,
about hope. But the great gift that hope was here was to me, Steve, was that I think I kind of grew up with a hope is a thing with feathers that perches on
yeah,
and all that. And but that couldn't be the kind of hope that was in this book. That wasn't gonna last. It couldn't be the kind of hope that's like a butterfly and off it goes. It had to be something really strong. It had to be like an anchor.
yeah.
You had to fight for it. You had to pull it down. And finding that about hope was very powerful for me. And then I realized that hope had to pull it down. This is who I want to be. This is what I want you to call me. Despite what my background's been,
Yeah.
I want to change it now. And so those kinds of issues all kind of came together for me that way.
I love the notion, and hope was here as well, that kind of family is not only who you're born into, but who you gather around you,
Yeah,
or
that's right.
in some cases, who gathers you around them,
Mm,
right? Because when Stoop, who they become connected with, and people read the
yeah,
story, just refuses to not let her be part of it, right?
yeah,
She's hesitant. Do I really want to be involved? Does my aunt want to be involved? And Stoop just kind of says, "Well, you're involved. You're part of my life, right?"
right, right.
Here. And I like that a great deal that goes on in that book. That like you say, it's a small microcosm of how in a small community people try to gather and remedy things. How they try to fix things.
Mhm.
And some things can be fixed and some things can't be fixed. But
That's right.
the hope goes on, right?
It
So
does. And the other thing that I tried to do, and I guess in some ways I try to do this in most of my books, if not all, that I give my kids, work to do. I really do, because that was significant for me growing up. And here is Hope, and she is really developed her people skills. She goes up to she can sell dessert to anybody, this kid. She really can. And yet those same skills were so transferable then into a political campaign, and she didn't know it.
yeah,
But so it was kind of like she was getting ready. And I want kids to know that some of the stuff you're doing now, you are getting ready to take it because there is a next level to it.
yeah. It's I never waited tables, but I sold
Yeah.
shoes. You know,
Oh my gosh. Did you
so
really? Okay.
well, my dad was a J.C. Penney manager.
Okay.
So when I was a kid, and I was the oldest, he'd take us to the store and we didn't buy clothes unless it came from J.C. Penney's because
Yeah.
we had the
Sure.
discount as family. And I can remember he'd sit us all down, the five of us, and fit us all in shoes. So by the time I was 16, well, I knew how to do that. I knew how to,
Yeah.
and I can remember that those skills of organizing. I mean, as a 16 or 17-year-old, a mother would come in with 3 or 4 kids and, get back to school shoes. And I'd say, okay, I'm listening to you. They can talk all they want, but the person
Yeah.
I'm listening to is you. So
Yeah.
are we getting tennis shoes for everybody? They back, what are we doing? And and she would look at me sometimes like, oh, someone's going to listen to me. But I,
That's,
I think the skills I learned from selling shoes and kind of picking up on what people wanted or didn't want helped me as a classroom teacher,
oh,
you
I
know,
bet. Sure.
looking at groups of kids and organizing and say, no, you guys are in a group, but nobody's listening to anybody. Carol, you're in charge, now go on as a group, right? So I love that sense of independence you give kids because they have tasks that they're
Mhm.
mastering. I love
Yeah.
that about your books that, and I think that rings true through all of them. Well, let's break a little bit from talking book to book and tell me a little bit about your creative process and
Uh,
has it evolved during the years? I mean, your first book, if you're writing in 15-minute chunks, I can't imagine that's what you've always done. So,
mhm.
what does the writer's day look like, and what does it look like over the years for the creative?
Yeah, yeah, great questions. Um, I get up, in the beginning, well, the 15 minutes, but then and now where I am is I get up at 4 o'clock in the morning. Now that's not noble. I just wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning. That's just how it is. And I can either lie in bed and worry about the world, or I can get up and there's nobody up, not even the dog, and it's this wonderful time of darkness in the house. And I have not had a bunch of stuff running to mess up my mind yet. And I go into my office, I really do. It's a very, very sweet time for me to think about that. Stories come to me in very different ways. As I said, I don't try to operate from theme because I think that can get heavy. I remember years ago, I had a screenwriting teacher who said, don't write about communism as an example. Don't write about communism. Write about a communist.
Yeah.
So you can kind of, learn how somebody is thinking about it, and that can apply to all different kinds of things. So I have in my office right now, if I open the door, I have a bunch of bins that don't have tops on them. And these are stories that have yet to be realized.
Uh,
So I've learned, I've gone from having just grocery bags by my chair to now, to now baskets. I've gone uptown now,
well,
on
you're
this
still
idea.
hard copy, which is a
I
little
am. I
horrifying.
am. I am. So I have come, I'll tell you, part of my journey has been appreciating the little ideas that flit by. And I used to think, oh, well, now I write them down. I really do. And I keep an idea file and I go through that thing a few times a year. I pulled out characters. I pulled out these nutty little moments. It's just there. I have really come to respect a small idea
Yeah,
because I've seen how they can become these bigger things. Um, so I will often start with a character. I will often do this thing that I do with schools, actually. And I said, well, how old is this character? And, where is she from? And what kind of family does she come from? And what is her dream? And where is she tripping over that? And, when all the lights go out in the story, who's the one person that she can go to talk to? And I just begin to do that a little bit. And it's amazing how in a very, very short period of time, you have really got a person. You've got a human
yeah,
sitting right next to you. So I try to do that. I've always been somebody who had a zillion ideas at the same time, which is very dangerous. That's why the bins are so key. But I also try to look at what's going on in the world. Where are people hurting? What might be, the right kind of thing to do. And then I try to people my stories with those kinds of characters that can talk into that situation or to talk into that character. And I don't start, chapter one, page one right away. I do a lot of research.
yeah,
Oh, I over research, which can be a problem because you got too much stuff. Um, but I just want to, I want somebody, I'm an abysmal tennis player, just awful. It's disgusting. People would probably pay me to get off to get off to put down my racket. But if I'm going to write about tennis, I want somebody who really knows how to play tennis to say, wow, she must play.
yeah.
So I feel it's my responsibility to do that. And I also honestly feel it's my responsibility to to write to write stories that will elevate kids and
Yeah,
help them. Not kittens wearing sun hats, but
yeah,
really, you can write about some dark stuff, but you got to show me the hope. Show me where the hope is. And if it's
yeah,
not there, that's hard for me.
yeah.
That's hard for me. I can't do that. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I think your books do that too. That's one of the things that when I think back about you as an author and the things I know, I think that they are resonant with this. I hate to use the word comic because I mean comic or comedic in the true
Mm.
Shakespearean sense, right? That
Yeah. Thank you.
there's there, but but there's also some grounded optimism or hope of
Mm.
characters that strike people as real. And
Mm.
you mentioned Chris Lynch earlier, and I would say often people might confuse Chris Lynch's books as dark, but I think they're
Mhm.
similar to yours in that he has a character that's trying to move through difficult times that becomes
Yeah.
a real character, right? So
Yeah.
I think that that's a real important grounding. So now, how long do you stay in that dark 4 o'clock room?
Well,
And
it gets to be five,
yeah,
thankfully, and then
and
first light breaks off.
do
Yeah.
you just
I
keep reminiscing on inspiration for 2 hours and then write 5 words and leave? Or what does the writing look like? When are
Yeah,
you
what does the
doing
writing
that?
look like? I mean, I will, um, yeah, I'm usually there at least 3 hours, sometimes four. I just finished a book and it's my first book for adults, actually, for older
Oh,
readers. And that was I thought, oh, yeah, I can do that. It's no big deal. It was really hard. It's a little bit different sensibility. So I really just did a line edit on that before I sent it to my editor. And I was working 10 hours a day,
wow.
really, right, just like that. But to your point about starting a novel, I start getting little snippets of dialogue. I start thinking about, okay, what's the real problem? My screenwriting training has really helped me because I
Yeah.
think in 3 acts, I do. And, first we see the introduction of the character, and then we see the introduction of, the want that they have. And it might not be a great want, but they want it. And so they get on the road. It causes them to get on the road to try to find it. And then there is the, moment where it doesn't seem like it's going to happen at all. And then you have, your resolve. So I am always thinking about that. And I'm always making those kinds of ideas. So what would it be? What would it be? I never know the full story. I never outline it. I can't do that. I have to have some surprise. And, eventually as I'm doing that, it's funny. It's sort of like, I remember one time we were going to look to find a puppy. And so we went to this breeder and I actually got to go into this little pen with all these puppies and they all jump on you eventually. But then eventually one has staying power
Yeah.
and you go, you are my dog. I get it. I get it. And ideas are like that.
Yeah.
Ideas are like that. And you got to be able to play with them. Got to
So
be
do
able
you,
to play with them.
you write scenes and snippets of dialogue and you don't care about the order initially at first. You
Not at
care
all.
about the moment you're in, the
I
scene
care
you're
about the
in.
moment that I'm in to try to begin to feel who the characters are. John Travolta said that when he got not the characters sound to their voice, he had to get the walk.
Oh,
He got the walk, then he knew he was embodying the character. For me, it's definitely the voice,
yeah.
but it's also where does their humor intersect their pain? So I have to really think about some hard stuff that happens to these kids and to the families and all that. And it is kind of like having a bunch of, blocks. It doesn't sound, to me, it's a journey through, but then I start getting it. Then I start getting, Hope was here, for example. I had all this stuff kind of laying on my table and I had she wanted to find her dad. She had named herself Hope, she and her aunt had to move, to this dinky little dairy town because they've been betrayed. You know, she
Yeah.
meets this guy who's got leukemia, for crying out loud. She's working for a guy. That's not a great career move, you know, working for a guy who has leukemia. And he's going to run for mayor. All these things, nothing fit together. Then I have to find the place that fit together. And I looked at all this stuff and I thought, okay, Joan, you finally really messed up, really, because none of this goes together. And then I realized, politics,
Yeah.
living your life, being in food service, it's all about serving up your very best.
Yeah.
And when I got that, then I could start, you know, kind of sewing the things together.
So you'll stay at it for 2 or 3 or 4 hours.
Yeah.
How do you know that you can get up and leave for the day? Do you leave a line? Have you accomplished 1,000 words? Do you have any kind of indicator that it's okay to stop today and I'll come back tomorrow?
Yeah, I don't have a specific indicator like that. I've certainly tried that, you know, I've said, well, I'll stop after 1,000 words, and then, you know, I've only been able to write 250, and then I sit there, you know, and I watch the moon come up, and it's like, this is not working for me. And you know, and then I also tried to say, well, I'm gonna, like Hemingway said, stop when you've got something that you really like, you really want to come back to. Well, those were, whenever I did that, those are always the days where I hated everything that I'd done. And so right now it's just instinct. It's
Yeah,
just that satisfaction. Okay, I tried. If it didn't go well, I tried.
yeah,
And if it did go well, you know, sometimes I'll push longer. Now,
yeah.
sometimes I'll go too far and then I'll mess things up. It is not, it's not I wish I had one kind of a thing, but I don't.
You mean there's not just a success five steps and we can be successful like Joan? You haven't got it down to that yet?
Yeah, well, you know, that'll be on my website in a little bit. That's sadly, no. Sadly,
Yeah,
no. But you know what it's like when you're, you know, you just, after a while, you just get a sense. Okay, okay. And maybe I'm tired too, you know?
yeah,
Maybe I'm just bloody tired.
yeah.
And I need to stop at that. Maybe I'll come back a little bit later, but yeah, I don't know.
How
It seems
long does it
cheaper.
take you to get to a finished draft doing this? Because I can tell you're a big thinker, you ponder, you mull things over. So
Yeah.
how long on average does it take you to get a draft?
You mean like a workable first draft?
Yeah, workable. I'm done. Now I'm fine tuning it. I know it's a book. I know where it goes.
Yeah.
Um,
I
there'll
would
still be surprises. I haven't talked to an author yet that said, "Oh, there were no surprises during revision." Right? I
It's like,
think.
oh man, really? That's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you know, it can take maybe 6 months sometimes
Yeah.
to get that, to really get that. But I don't start until I have really gotten a deep rooted sense in my main character and maybe an important person in their life. And I have done some real research. I even did research, and I was a waitress for a long time, but I even did research about being a waitress
Yeah.
just to, you know, bring it up because I wanted that in my hands. I didn't want to have to stop and then research it. I wanted it. I wanted it that way. So a book will take me, you know, a book will take me now about a year. And
And
yeah,
half of that is getting it to a workable first draft, and then the other half is revising it. And
yeah,
to
it's like
terrify people that want to be writers, how many revisions or how many go-throughs do you do? Do you
I
have any
did
idea?
7 unsquashed. I remember
Yeah.
first few times I went to visit schools, I brought them all. And, you know, and I said, you know, listen, no kidding. Yeah. Revision is part of it. It's just like practice is part of being an athlete.
Yeah.
Practice is part of being a musician. You don't just sit down, you know, and play Bach. You just don't. That
Yeah.
counterpoint, and there's so much counterpoint in storytelling, right? I
Yeah.
mean, that kind of rhythm and that kind of stuff going together and the bass and all these things, you gotta listen to, you gotta listen to it. And you just kind of have to pay attention to yourself. And I remember a few times I've been writing, and all of a sudden, this character I didn't even know anything about would just jump out with great authority, sort of like, ta-da, lucky you, I'm here. And I'm going to, this is where we're going to go.
Yeah.
So, I think I pushed through, just like when I used to run before my car accident, I would push through to find that zone
Uh,
where it wasn't as hard. I didn't get there every day, but I really try to do that with my characters, to push through and get that zone where they become these natural beings.
and do you find that even if you have a first workable draft, are some of those characters begging to be fine-tuned in the revision?
Oh my gosh,
Yeah.
they all are. They
Yeah.
all are. Yeah, absolutely. And sometimes I find this is rather fascinating as a concept, but it's awful when you initially discover it, that you have got, three characters that you should just make one.
Oh,
That happened in Backwater. That happened definitely in Hope Was Here. And I just sometimes I'll just go, oh, we can have this little vibe over here. And oh, we'll have it. No, put them all together. And so yeah, there are all kinds of ways to sew it. Yeah. But you were saying about revision. It is a profound discipline to embrace. Because if you don't, you're not, you just won't get there. You won't
yeah.
get there.
It
It
has
is
to be
all
done.
about writing is so weird. Because in the beginning, and I don't have a writing partner. In the beginning, it's all you and some kind of a garret. I started out with a big desk in the hall, and the desk was so big it was hard to get in and out of get out of the front door. But it is completely you pulling all this stuff. And then all of a sudden, if you're lucky enough to get published, all of a sudden, now the parade of folks comes in. And I remember my first editorial letter on Squash, and I'd won this big contest. And I was told that it was unanimous by the judges that Squash was the winner.
When,
Everybody I saw that week just couldn't say enough about it. And then I got, including my editor, and then I got a 6-page dense, editorial letter. And and my editor's assistant called me and she said she really liked it. She often writes a longer letter than this. I couldn't believe that all these things, I was stunned.
yeah.
But you have to have this mindset that you know what your story is. You don't have to agree with everything, but man, now you're part of a team. They know more about publishing than you do.
Yeah.
You know, but they know, listen to the PR people, listen to the salespeople, listen to your editor, listen. And then try to make those things in a way that you feel is organic to your story, but don't shut the door. You cannot do that. And kids today, and even, when I was starting out, you feel there's this rush that's different, I think, in writing than maybe in other kinds of forms of art in some ways. You feel it. You feel the words just flow from you. How can this be wrong? How can this be wrong? You just sat there. You were completely entranced.
Yeah.
The story came to you. Well, guess what? Often that's a good start, but guess what? You got to smooth that. Kids don't want to do that, but they don't want to do it, but they don't know how.
Yeah. They don't know how.
So
And
you have to learn that's what you have to do.
yeah, when I was working, with pre-service teachers, I would say the most important thing you can do with kids when you're teaching them writing is get them to own their own learning.
Ah,
And I wish I knew the secret to that, but
yeah,
um, if a kid really starts owning what they're writing, then they care
yeah,
about it. Then they care
yeah.
about if they're using the right word. They care about the punctuation. They care about if they're giving enough supporting detail. If they don't care, the last 3 years I taught, I had that statement across the top of the board: own your own learning. And
That's
then when a
great.
kid would come to me and complain, I say, well, is this just a complaint because you don't want to own your own learning? Do you want me to own it
Yes.
for you?
Yeah,
I don't get to go live your life. You're a senior and in 3 months you'll be gone. And
right.
what I can help you now, but I'm not going with you, and
Mhm.
most chances your mom isn't either. So,
Yeah,
so
yeah, that's a gift you give to people when you talk to them like that.
yeah. So, but it's hard to do. But if they do, um, well, I'll give you a quick example. There was about a 10-year period where a teacher in Alaska and I taught a Dickens novel serially at the same time. And we didn't talk about it, but every other Tuesday we were teaching this novel. And then our students were pen pals. So we didn't teach it the same way, but our students then had to write to their pen pal.
Yeah.
That was the most authentic writing they did, because all of a sudden, this was before we had emails and everything. This is in the late 90s, right? In the
Mhm.
90s and um, 80s and 90s. They owned their writing that they were sending to someone.
Mhm.
I had a mediocre student Tracy Butcher, he got companioned with the student body president up in Alaska, who was bright, maybe going to be the valedictorian. And all of a sudden, Tracy realized he was embarrassing himself if he hadn't read the book, if he didn't know what he was doing. And
Yeah,
he
yeah.
started reading the book and recruiting his buddies to help him write the letter. He didn't realize, we found out later, that she was recruiting her friends. So these two letters became team efforts for half the year, where they were trying to impress each other back and forth. Well, you can't teach that, right? It has to be something that they eventually decide, oh, people are going to look at my writing and take it
Mhm.
seriously. So
Yeah,
I need to
that's
take it seriously.
that's a great story.
Yeah.
And one of the hacks that I do is I'll read my stuff out loud to myself.
Ah,
And just most recently with this novel that I turned, this adult novel, I needed a little bit more. I recorded myself reading it, and then I heard it back and I went, oh, I could really hear some of the blips. I could hear where I went on too long. I could hear where I was trying a little bit too hard. And the other hack that I figured out, when I am stuck, and I get stuck on every novel, I really do. There's a point where I just go,
there's a
oh,
point
I
where you're
can't.
stuck.
Oh, forget it. But I've now since learned to take the writing of someone that I really admire, and not just read it, not just read it out loud, not take notes on it. I actually type it. So
Oh,
I am living in their fingers. I am. And I am seeing where the sentences go. I'm seeing where the paragraphs end. And I'll do that sometimes for 3 or 4 pages. And then even if I had to go to the bathroom, tough. I immediately move from that to the novel where I'm stuck. And often, no kidding, Steve, it will just be enough.
wow, that's really
Let me
good.
go.
So that
Yeah.
leads us to some of the questions. Do you have a set of books that you read for inspiration that you go to over and over again?
Yeah, I love the bean trees. I just think that was Barbara Kingsolver. I absolutely, I adore that. Um, I read the Bible. I really do. It just something that is always, kind of there. It's always there with me. I have a lot of To Kill a Mockingbird is my absolute favorite forever and ever amen book. I just the inspiration and the crafting of the dad. And I even when I was in
Yeah,
high school, I would say, what if Atticus was my father, what would he tell me right now?
yeah,
So the sensibility of this family story pitted against civil rights, just so powerful. Yeah.
yeah. Wow, that's pretty amazing. I wanted to ask you, you said something else that struck me as you wrote the first book. You were living in New York. Do you think it was a gift and easier to find an agent and get into the industry because you had some screenwriting experience and you were in New York? Do you think it's a gift to be there? Um,
Yeah, I mean, everything's going on there pretty
yeah,
much. But so much is done online now.
And now, yeah,
I mean, I was certain that, because I said to my husband, we have to be in New York. But when I got my first editorial letter, I pictured I would be leaning across my editor's desk and we would have sandwiches, and we'd be talking about this. No, it came in the mail. And
yeah,
so, but yeah, I don't think it is the issue that it used to be.
yeah,
I think you really can negotiate, throughout that. That's not the wall that it used to be. What you have to do, and I think I'm really seeing this, is that I know that we want instant gratification. I know that we want to all get published. We just do. But listen, the best thing you can do initially is to become such a good writer, to love it, to love the hard stuff, to love the reframing, to love the, listening to dialogue, and then go out. Don't start at lower than your best, and never show any publishing professional anything that isn't your absolute best.
yeah.
Don't do it.
Keep working. Well, that's good advice for people that they go through there. Yeah, I wondered about that because I think it's changed since the time you started. Uh,
Oh, yeah. I mean, I have little kids,
yeah,
first graders who come up to me and say, well, I wrote a novel. And I thought, okay, I'm really glad that you went at that, but that is not the same thing
yeah,
as, as what you wrote a story, and that's wonderful. But I think we've forgotten what this really, really, really means. And it really means, boundaries. It means you got to give stuff up in your life. It means, you crack open your heart and you let what you know about resilience and what you know about hope and what you know about, forgiveness and all this stuff pour out of you, and then fine tune it. I'm a big, big proponent right now. And I did this with this adult novel because I don't have an editor right now. For adult novels, I don't.
right.
I do for children's stuff, but I hired a freelance editor.
Hmm.
I got to tell you something. Boy, did that make a difference. I
Oh,
was so glad I did that, and just really put it out there. Let people just tell you and get, and that's the nice thing. You're not in the room with them, so you can go, "What's she smoking? Are you kidding
yeah.
me? That was a great joke." But then go back and think, no, wait a minute. Wait. Is my job just to satisfy me and my story? Or is my job to to talk to the reader and let me remove the stones that I can't see right now?
Yeah,
Very important.
that's good. Now, you started out, like you said, as a screenwriter. Have any of your books been turned into a film that I've missed? I've
Yeah.
changed the
No,
name,
you
so
haven't. Sadly, you've not missed it. I am I'm the poster girl for patience. But I mean, I started out and then I had the car accident. And then, I went right into YA.
uh-huh.
So, but Hope Was Here is, I am, it is moving forward. I don't want to say hurtling forward. I wish it was, but it's moving forward as an indie film. I'm the screenwriter on it. The third
Okay.
draft of that script is being, is being used, and we have a lot of things in place. We're kind of ready to go. We
Good.
just need to, we're waiting, and I can't tell you who, on,
Yeah,
uh, a couple of actors to sign on
to
with
decide
us.
whether they're going to do
That's
it or
been,
not. Yeah,
and wow, was that hard?
yeah,
Because the difference between, everything in a movie, with the exception of an occasional voiceover, but you can't have too much, it's
right.
got to be action.
Yeah,
And Hope Was Here as first person. So
yeah,
she's got all of her emotional stuff. She's talking, well, how do I show that?
yeah.
To really learn that was it was really good discipline. Yeah.
That's really good. Well, I hope it keeps coming along. If it
Thank you.
does, we'll have another interview. That
That
would
would be great. I'd love
really
it.
we could do this. Well, Joan, I've taken up plenty of your time today, and you've been really riveting to listen to. I've enjoyed your comments on this, and I think we've got something that will be really exciting for people to listen to.
I'm so glad. I thoroughly enjoyed it. You pull out the best in people. Can I
Well,
tell you one thing that came to me?
sure.
There's a story that my grandmother had in a book, and it was about not giving up. And it was about the great violinist Paganini
Uh,
was about to play this concert. He had a Stradivarius violin. And for whatever reason, for a moment, he left it backstage, or maybe he had to go to the bathroom. I don't know. But he left it there and he came back and it was gone. And the orchestra was tuning up. I mean, it was time for him to go out and it was gone. He looked everywhere, couldn't find it. And what was left was this scratched secondhand violin. He didn't know what to do. And they announced, here he comes. So he tuned it up. He walked on stage and he said, ladies and gentlemen, I will now show you that music doesn't come from the instrument, it comes from the soul. And he played that thing like, and the roof went off the place. That's what we have to do with our stories.
yeah. Well, that's a great ending story. I appreciate your time so much. This has been great to have you as a guest.
Thank you, Steve. Loved it.